We're going to move on to our second and, some extended applause there. So our second and final economics and finance panel of the day. So if our panelists would like to come on stage. Panelists, that's your cue. You may come on stage. Your moderator for this panel is State Street Senior Vice President and Head of Digital Product Development and Innovation, Pinar Emirdağ.
I think you should be there, huh?
Okay. All right. Okay, so, we are the second finance panel, and we happen to be also following, the first one was incredibly interesting central bank panel. So it's we have a very, very high barrier, really, high expectations maybe. And it's the end of the day, so we need to just get going. So the topic of the day today is value transfer in the digital age, like all the payment mechanism, money, future of money, sort of things like that. And before I go further, talk a little bit more, what I'd like to do is to ask the panelists to introduce themselves and their relationship with this topic of money and payment systems, and they should give some perspective. And then what I think we should be covering, and we'd like to have a more of a free format, but in general, like kind of definition of this money from cryptocurrencies all the way to central bank digital cash, I have to say here that central bank digital cash is out of scope for this panel because it was discussed before. And then what are the potential applications? And maybe in the last section, what are the potential implications, consequences of this changing nature of money and payment systems, perhaps? And of course, I think we will be talking about Libra as well. So that's kind of what to expect. But maybe I can start with Alex to introduce himself.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Alex Lipton. I'm a CTO of Sila Money, a startup developing programmable money. And hence, this probably the reason I'm on this panel. I'm also a fellow at MIT. In my previous life, I was the global head of analytics for Bank of America, and as far as money is concerned, I love it, and so I suppose that's my personal relationship to it, but also I am very interested in it as a theorist as well as a practitioner. So I think that our payment system need to be updated, and I think that blockchain can help.
Hello. Good evening. I am Tommaso Aste. I am professor at UCL, University College London, and I am the scientific director of the Center for Blockchain Technologies at UCL, which is, as you all know, is the best, the largest, and the most beautiful center in the world on blockchain. There is the executive director, Paolo Pascasca. And okay, my interest, I am a physicist by training. My interest in this domain is mostly driven by the interest for complexity. And we know that these systems are very, very complex, and whatever we do or whatever innovation we introduce in these systems, the consequences are very hard to foresee, and there is a need of a lot of science for it, and they need a lot of interdisciplinary science. And the concept of money, it's always been kind of complex, by the way, historically, and it's becoming more now with this technological innovation, and we'll talk about that later.
Perfect. John, if I could.
So I'm a professor at the London School of Economics, where I also direct the Systemic Risk Center dealing with financial stability and related things. And also, I'm also part of Tommaso's Blockchain Center. Now, so I come into this as a person who cares about long-term financial stability, and cryptocurrencies, of course, touch up on that. And my consequence is I wrote a paper called Cryptocurrencies Don't Make Sense, which is perhaps a topic we might get to later on in this panel.
And Gilbert.
Thank you. Gilbert Verdian, founder and CEO of Quant Network. We've solved interoperability at scale, and the background to money is a 20-year career in cybersecurity. I ran the payment infrastructure as the chief security officer for the Bank of England, so keeping all the money safe across all the payment systems and the payment rails. And now we're also company guarantors to Pay UK, putting the strategy in place for future payments, including central bank money as well, but creating an ecosystem around what's the potential of money and what we can do with it. And that's my interest. We're shaping the system.
Cool. So just let's kick off with an observation. And we have been, here is a kind of a mind map, and this is probably not the only way to do things, but if we consider cryptocurrencies on one side of the spectrum, and on the other side of the spectrum you have central bank digital cash, I mentioned this, it looks like in between now emerging a number of stable coins, and lack of a better word, it may not be the best terminology, but let's call them that. It could be, there are different versions of it. This was discussed the whole day, starting with Alex Lipton's presentation this morning. So from programmable money to all kinds of asset-backed cash tokens to now maybe Libra and so forth. And all the way, probably somewhere around there, there's a project that's called Utility Settlement Coin Project. Just for full disclosure, State Street actually recently very publicly named, just with other 13 financial institutions, as one of the investors of the company that actually is going to develop this. It's called Finality. So it is maybe in that spectrum at some point. And you have the central bank digital cash. And it looks like, depending on the use cases, risk profiles, access mechanisms, that whole spectrum is becoming is really your domain of solutions. Does that make sense to you? I mean, this is kind of the framework that I've been playing around with, but what do you think? Should I just ask maybe Alex first, or?
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind at all. It's an interesting question, and in my mind, this blockchain technology in particular, but more generally kind of this development of this way of thinking that we can sort of try to build money by ourselves rather than relying on the government, brings us to this thinking about the whole, as you say, spectrum of money or money-like things, and perhaps we should be not necessarily striving to build an ultimate money. By the way, there is, I suppose, a startup which claims that they have built perfect money, but when you read the white paper, you kind of understand that it breathes like up and down and that sort of thing. So anyway, beware of anyone who says that they have a perfect solution for money. But I mean, various mechanisms which possess certain attributes, but maybe not all attributes, seem to be quite useful. In fact, in a sense, we are going back in time to the 19th century, even before, when there was money issued by all kind of banks and even scrip money issued by companies. And so we can see a sort of resurgence of this. Whether it's a good thing or not, I don't know. But what I can say is that modern technology, in principle, makes it possible with a new remit in life.
Any thoughts around that?
Well, yeah, I kind of support this, and I would add just this, that I mean, technology is not able to solve, I think, most of the fundamental problem associated with money that has been there for centuries, if not millennia. And it might make it faster, it might make it global instantaneously, but still there are fundamental issues that cannot be solved. However, I mean, the blockchain has definitely made us understand it much better, the way in which a distributed system works, and the way in which a community can find instruments to collaborate and coordinate. And this might make a difference with money, and also we know that the electronic, the digital aspect of this different kind of money, or the same kind of old money. However, they make possible smart contracts, etc., which can combine money with completely different operations, with completely different things that before were hard to do. I mean, not impossible, but hard to do.
So are we, is this really money in the sense that we know it with the store of value and medium of exchange and so forth, or are we talking about something completely new here? Gilbert, do you want to?
Yeah, I think where we are now is programmable money. So you can put logic and conditions around how you trade, whereas before it was very binary, buy, sell, and that was it. So the ledger's balanced from an accounting perspective. But if you look at programmable money, you can actually add more complexity and more rules to facilitate trade. And that gives you market access. That gives you the ability to do things that are very non-digital and manual with PDFs and faxes, where you can actually program that in as a condition. So we're working, I mean, in a real-world example, we're working with SIA, which is a leading payment infrastructure provider in Italy. We're actually adding interoperability and programmable logic to settle between different currencies and kind of stable coins, which can be backed by an asset, which can be backed by a central bank. And we're doing this with 570 banks today. And so this is something that's been, you know, theoreticized in the past, but there's real-world implications where you're seeing financial systems actually implement this in the real world.
It almost sounds like to me, though, and literally I'm just thinking this out loud, payments, the concepts of payment systems and money are collapsing somehow, converging to each other in that case.
Yeah, I think they're evolving.
Be viable?
Yeah. Sorry.
No, I mean, is that, what do you think?
I think they're evolving. I mean, the whole concept of money is an IOU. I mean, the paper just says IOU X, and you settle between different parties. I think it's kind of converging, and not collapsing, but converging in a way where we're going to have new types of trade where we couldn't do this before. And it's just thanks to digitization and thanks to the DLT technology that allows us to have that trust to be able to do this for the first time.
Makes sense. John, do you have any thoughts around this?
So historically, we used a lot of things for money: cigarettes, seashells, gold, silver, any possible commodity. And quite a lot of the digital currency discussion sort of ignores all the historical analysis that led us to the point of modern-day central banks. There is a reason why central bank fiat money looks the way it is, it's governed the way it is, and that is because it solves a large number of problems. And as far as I can tell, central bank fiat money is the best way to manage society's money supply. Whether or not you tokenize it or do otherwise is a beneficial improvement. But as you move away from that, either into the Libras of the world or the JP Morgan coin or into the stable coins of Bitcoin, you are moving away from the beneficial function to society into increasingly dangerous domains. So as we go down this road, the blockchain technology and the various disguises is, of course, fantastic. It solves a problem of trust. But I do think we need to stay in the realm of central bank money, either tokenized or otherwise.
So in that spectrum that we are talking about, you think that future will be more closer to central bank money or equal, similar?
I think the future will be very close to central bank money. And one should not also underestimate the determination and the power of the modern state to ensure that happens. I don't think any government will allow it to be otherwise.
Okay. Any views from this side?
Yeah, I think governments will do their utmost to keep it this way. Having said that, I can envision, the introduction of, for example, commodity money, something which my MIT colleagues and I have been working on for some time. And in a sense, I would say, I wouldn't be surprised if one were to take into account that the domination of the US dollar is not to everybody's liking, right? So that might generate a certain kind of amount of activity, and in fact, say the former president of the People's Bank of China was making all kind of protestation in this regard, and so on and so forth. So I would be surprised if the Bretton Woods agreement and kind of its abolition in the 70s and so on, and kind of what we have right now, would survive unadulterated much further. It would be entirely within the realm of possibility to see a certain competitor to the dollar as a settlement coin of the entire world. But of course, make no mistake, it would not be Libra. That is for sure.
Before we get to Libra,
Why not? I'm just saying that what I said might sound as an implicit endorsement of Libra. It is not. No.
Taking that further, you are working on something, Sila Money, right?
Yeah.
And just an example, what would one consider building these new types of cash tokens? Let's say again, lack of a better word, or stable coins. What kind of design goals that you?
Yeah, well, our kind of goal is to provide, fintech companies and eventually whoever needs it with efficient payment systems which can be programmed, and in fact are being programmable. And in this regard, extremely efficient, very fast, combined with KYC AML, which is something which needs to be done anyway, because money and identity are extremely closely interwoven into the legal economy. Having said that, the society at large needs to decide to what extent, this has to be kept like this or like that, and so on and so forth. That for the lawmakers rather than for technologists. But we think that it is very useful, and in fact we kind of have a lot of interest in some clients and whatnot. And having said that, we do not really at this stage envision creating new type of money, because we essentially tokenize, kind of existing assets. That's, in my mind, a very promising first step. Whether, everything else would kind of be tokenized and become a means of payment remains to be seen. So for the time being, we're quite happy to tokenize the US dollar. We have plenty of room to grow.
Okay, so talking about perhaps applications. So you mentioned, Alex, the fintech companies and the payment rails. And today I did listen to SDX. I think their presentation is very interesting as well. So
Right.
they have a different way of looking at things. What do you think would be the applications of these new cash tokens, like in capital markets, and any views around what does it mean for financial services, for example? Traditionally, I think, Gilbert, you sound like you have some views about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think digital assets were ignored before, but now they've become a reality. And what we're seeing is treating a digital asset at the same level as a traditional security, a stock, a bond, a debenture, whatever it is, and treating it in the same regulatory lens. So you control and KYC and AML to the same level. And we're seeing our clients actually using digital assets combined with a stock and a bond and a physical building and another asset, and parceling that into a product and listing those on exchanges, on traditional exchanges. So the real world applications, it's another a form of digital asset which is being used to trade, but with the same regulatory regulation that's needed to do it. So we're seeing some really innovative things where people are saying, well, I've got this oil refinery, it's sitting there, I can actually tokenize it into an asset, and I can chop it up into bits, and I could transfer between different entities, between JP Morgan coin, and settle between another entity. And that's starting to be a reality. I mean, we're seeing another asset management client are using artwork, tokenizing that, and transferring it across digital assets because they need to have the history and the auditability and then the transferability. So it's creating liquidity. It's creating a new market which was very stale and just illiquid, and you couldn't do much with it.
So, okay, so this more about liquidity then, creating new liquidity and distribution mechanisms, and the cash token would be enabler for those digital assets.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. Okay, so let's, there are two more topics that I am very curious about. One, let's open up Libra conversation. I know it's early, and we only have a white paper. We don't know exactly what will happen and all those kind of things, but I think it's interesting. And I'm also afterwards very much curious about what does it mean, like from systemic risk perspective, like all of these things going on. But maybe we start with Libra. I have a feeling that will be a nice segue into that kind of conversation. So would you like to actually, Tommaso, kick off your views about Libra
If you
first? If that's the correct way of saying it, by the way.
Yeah, well, it's, the view is early, so it's difficult to have the definite view. However, I mean, there is disappointment because this is clearly not a distributed system. It's kind of, the design is centralized, so this is a kind of disappointment. What makes me more worried, actually, is not much the technology, which, I mean, I kind of understand that the big corporation does not need a decentralized system, at least, I mean, unless they want to change the business model. But it's actually the business model of Libra that makes me very worried, because, I mean, at least my interpretation of the white paper, and that is probably the second or third paragraph, they say, or the first even, they say, well, there is, all these unbanked poor, and, we give them financial services. In exchange of what? In exchange of their data. So they sell the data of the unbanked poor. They sell the data to the unbanked poor to sell the unbanked poor what they don't need. And this is a really scaring scenario. And I would say that the Western world, I mean, I came here without a single Swiss franc. I will live without spending spending a lot of Swiss francs, but through, I mean, not through paper. And so we do live essentially in a digital money era already, and to some extent, at least for what I can perceive, Visa and MasterCard, that are not the most certainly are not a distributed system. However, I mean, they treat our data fairly. I mean, I never get an advertisement of a coffee after I buy a coffee at the station. And I cannot say the same for Facebook. Mm-hmm. So they don't have any track record in this. So it's very worried.
So, Alex, very quick.
Yeah, I'm also not a big fan, to be perfectly honest. As I was telling earlier today in my speech, there is a lot of good and original stuff in the white paper and the second white paper, which is bigger. But the problem is that what is good is not original, and what is original is not good, right? So from that perspective, in particular, I say this because what in my mind is good is actually taking pretty much verbatim from the paper which Sandy Pentland and I published in Transactions of the Royal Society. And so, but putting aside my sort of hurt pride of authorship, what I would say is that I cannot believe for a moment that the purpose of the exercise is to bank the unbanked, and in fact, I doubt it very much that this is going to happen anyway, because these people, unfortunately, are unbanked for a reason, and first of all, because they just don't have suitable identities. This needs to be solved. That's one position. The second position is that kind of centralized systems which do things like that do exist, and you don't need this kind of immense, funfair to do this. For example, M-Pesa in Kenya, kind of works pretty well. And, thirdly, in my mind, this kind of the very idea that in the 21st century the future of money is actually company scrip, bothers me massively. I mean, I don't want to be paid in Uber dollars and that sort of thing, right? And so finally, what is underappreciated but of a big importance is that, given that the issuance of Libra, from the reading I was able to extract, is actually unimmunized, what it would result in weaker economies, like, for example, Venezuela, right? So believers will continue to circulate, plus on top of it, an equal amount of Libras will appear. So it's essentially, in one go, you will have twice as much ready cash as it is. And needless to say, I'm not a big fan of quantity theory of money. I actually think it's a joke. But in this particular instance, it will work. So essentially, if instantaneously you double the amount of cash, the prices will go up by a factor of 2, and in fact, more than a factor of 2. So in reality, what will happen, rather than helping the poor, it will ignite hyperinflation.
So I have a question for you, John. Mm-hmm. Actually, two questions maybe connected to each other or not. So Dan, do you think that these concepts, Libra, for example, I guess is going to help the unbanked. What does it mean for the welfare of the people? And also, what does it mean from the point of view of systemic risk? I mean, are we thinking if these things become very, very popular, is there any impact, or should we even worry about it? Or, I mean,
the phrase, "In God we trust," is printed on the US dollar. Money needs one thing, trust. You may trust in a blockchain in mining, or you may trust in a central bank. Nobody trusts Facebook. And if an entity you can't trust can't create money. So I think Libra is stillborn. Now let's come back to the slightly bigger issue of stability. So I do financial stability. Imagine a world where the likes of Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies become dominant. Now there are two consequences. One is stability. If you have a cryptocurrency, you will lend and borrow cryptocurrencies. You will end with derivative contracts on it. You will end with a bunch of infrastructure built on top of it. All of that affects supply and demand for the currency. And therefore, the way modern central banks work is they adjust the supply of currency to keep prices stable. There is no built-in mechanism in a crypto world to get stability, and therefore you will end up with a financial system where you have liquidity booms and busts. Prices will either go through very high inflation or high deflation, and there's nothing to prevent that. The institution of central banks is designed to prevent that eventuality, and for that reason alone, I think cryptocurrencies are a terrible idea. But there's a worse reason. Now, the total market value of all cryptocurrencies is around $300 billion today. The total market value of money, M1, is $30 trillion today. Imagine cryptocurrencies gain traction and displace fiat money. That means $300 billion become $30 trillion in the hands of a handful of crypto speculators. This is a transfer from me and all regular people into the hands of those people. Now, I find that socially completely unacceptable, and I suspect any government faced with any widespread adoption of privately issued cryptocurrencies would come to the same conclusion. The fairness argument alone means they cannot succeed. And I really think I have a paper arguing the terminal value of Bitcoin is zero. You might make money betting on it along the way to zero, but the terminal value is zero.
So, okay, so we basically talking, like in that spectrum of money, you have cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin and alike, and then almost like the slow money, the way that you describe it, is really all in the same bucket actually at the end of the day, not creation of new.
Is that go that far. No, in my mind, look, I mean, there are useful things about blockchain and useless things about blockchain, but one thing which it can potentially do and actually give banks run for their money is to simply record transactions. And in a sense, it's a historical accident of history that banks simultaneously perform two functions. That is recording transactions and moving existing money between parties. And secondly, creating new money or destructing it, the process of lending and repaying debt. So, I mean, banks are enormous behemoths, very complex, and actually it costs a lot of money to run a bank. You can take my word for it. But I worked for various banks for 20 years, so I know. But the point which I want to make is that part of this function can be done by kind of blockchain, not necessarily Bitcoin, because I don't care that much about the price of Bitcoin, but it has important implication for actually transaction costs, which cannot be tolerated easily. But there are other ideas nowadays, and there can be an honest, sort of relatively cheap way of transacting. And then, it is possible that if we liberate the banks from the burden of actually making transactions, and as such being extremely regulated entities and so on and so forth, and separate them into narrow banks, that's something which I have been arguing for a long time, in spite of resistance from the Fed and whatnot. I think it's an excellent idea. And secondly, investment pools, which will not be guaranteed by the government and will kind of live or die, in a natural way. I think this might be actually a bifurcation in the financial system, which will have implications for decades and centuries to come.
Okay, so this discussion can go forever. I know that actually. But before we just wrap up in the next one or 2 minutes, this is not going to be like predictions kind of thing because I don't really. I think this will be too simple. Any last points that you think maybe like almost even Tommaso and Gilbert that's missed that this audience would know, and or anyone else, or John, if you wanna just add.
Yeah, the financial system has been around, the one that we're using for quite a while. It was 70 years ago where we have the electronic version. Now we're moving to the decentralized digital version, and we're re-architecting the system for the first time. I like Libra opposing, but not because it's of a concept, but I don't like that it's Facebook. And as a security person, they've done this before. They've tried to allow free internet for the un-internet, emerging markets and using the data to monetize that. So what we need is 100 more Libra type of technologies, but backed by governing central banks, governments, consortiums that work together to create this new financial system that we're heading into. So I think that it's a great potential for this technology right now. And we're at the verge of a next generation of the financial system. And it's all about stability, governance, and growth. And we're heading there.
Perfect. Anything else?
I think we have to keep the benefits of blockchain and distributed ledger technology, but we should also prevent any other forms of money to be emerged. And I do hope the authorities will stamp very heavily on these alternatives and ban them.
Interesting.
I believe that here we are creating a new ecosystem, and in this sense I agree with you. And this new ecosystem will have high and downs and a lot of issues, but it is a new ecosystem. It will be here to stay. I mean, it will be blockchain, it will be distributed system, it will be certainly cryptography, etc., etc., etc. And there is something that we didn't talk about here, but cryptocurrencies are fantastic for taxation. And this, I don't think appeals many here, but it will appeal government a lot.
Interesting.
Yeah, and my parting words are as follows. So essentially, as I already mentioned, money and identity come hand in hand, and all kind of transgression in solving the KYC AML problem can have very severe implication to any organization which tries to issue tokenized payments and stuff like that. And so from that perspective, Libra, if it were to have any chance of success, has to understand that there is a humongous difference. And I will explain it with an example and stop at this stage. So for example, if a drug mule swallows a kilo of cocaine, buys a ticket on American Airlines and flies from Bogota to New York, where he is duty called, American Airlines is not really liable at all. However, if a financial institution were to be involved in payment for this and so on, it is on the hook for enormous fines. And so from that perspective, these things alone will make implementation of Libra extraordinarily difficult. If they think that they can strong arm the rather cavalier attitude towards regulation into the monetary sphere, I agree with you completely. No government who respects itself would allow this to happen. And as you say, nobody trusts Facebook. I have periodic kind of urge to cancel my profile. The only problem is that I have never had a profile and cannot do this. Otherwise, I would have done it.
Okay, so that is perfect example. Let's wrap up there, and it's a great example. I will remember that one. And thank you for the panel. And all I know is that last 10 days or so, we are all talking about Libra all the time. So there must be something interesting about this thing. So thank you so much. Thank you.